And in conclusion, that is why humans are classified as a Class 12 hazardous species, droned Professor Zilblax, his tentacles waving lazily in the air as he finished his lecture. The classroom of alien students sat in stunned silence, a mixture of awe and terror etched across their various appendages and sensory organs. A brave Zorblaxian in the front row tentatively raised a pseudopod. "Professor, if humans are so dangerous, why are they allowed to attend the Galactic University at all?" The professor's eye stalk swiveled towards the student, a look of wry amusement crossing his gelatinous features. "Ah, an excellent question. You see, despite their, shall we say, robust constitution, humans have proven to be surprisingly adept at interspecies diplomacy. Plus, their tuition fees are astronomical. The Board of Regents couldn't resist." A ripple of nervous laughter echoed through the classroom. At the back of the room, the lone human exchange student, Sarah, rolled her eyes. She was used to being treated like a walking disaster by now, but it didn't make it any less annoying. "Now then," continued Professor Zilblax, "let's move on to our next topic, Extreme Survival 101. This course is designed to prepare you for the harshest environments the galaxy has to offer. We'll be covering everything from acid rain planets to—" Sarah tuned out the professor's rambling, her mind wandering to more pressing matters like what the cafeteria was serving for lunch. She was jolted back to attention by a sudden burst of panicked chittering from her classmates. "And that's why we'll be taking a field trip to HFY X next week," the professor was saying, a mischievous glint in his eye stalks. "Pack your thermal suits, and don't forget your radiation pills." The classroom erupted into chaos. Sarah blinked in confusion. HFY X? That didn't sound so bad. A bit chilly maybe, but nothing a good jacket couldn't handle. As the bell rang and the alien students scurried out in various states of distress, Sarah approached the professor's desk. "Excuse me, sir. I couldn't help but notice everyone seemed a bit upset about this field trip. Is there something I'm missing?" Professor Zilblax's tentacles writhed in what Sarah had come to recognize as the alien equivalent of a chuckle. "Ah, Miss Thompson. I sometimes forget you're not familiar with our galactic classification system. HFY X is what we call a Class 1 death world, the most inhospitable type of planet in the known universe." Sarah's brow furrowed. "But isn't Earth classified as a death world too?" "Indeed it is, my dear. A Class 12 to be precise. The difference is that HFY X is actively trying to kill you every second you're there. Earth is more of a passive-aggressive murderer." Sarah couldn't help but laugh. "Well, when you put it that way. So, what should I expect on this field trip?" The professor's eye stalks narrowed, temperatures hovering around absolute zero, gravity 3 times that of standard, and atmosphere so thick you could swim through it if it weren't also highly corrosive. "Oh, and let's not forget the charming local wildlife that views anything moving as a potential snack." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like a typical Tuesday in Australia. Do I need to bring anything special?" Professor Zilblax stared at her for a long moment before bursting into gelatinous laughter. "Oh, MS Thompson, your species never ceases to amaze me. Just bring yourself and a positive attitude. The university will provide all necessary survival gear." As Sarah left the classroom, she couldn't help but feel a tinge of excitement. This field trip was shaping up to be way more interesting than she'd anticipated. The following week, Sarah found herself crammed into a transport ship with her alien classmates, all of whom were bundled up in so many layers of protective gear they resembled colorful, terrified marshmallows. She glanced down at her own outfit, a slightly bulkier version of a standard spacesuit, and shrugged. At least she could move her arms. "All right, class," came Professor Zilblax's voice over the ship's comm system. "We'll be touching down on HFY X in approximately 5 minutes. Remember your training, stick to your assigned groups, and for the love of all that's holy, don't try to pet the local fauna." Sarah could have sworn she heard him mutter, no matter how adorably they tried to disembowel you under his breath. As the ship began its descent, Sarah's alien seatmate, a glibbler named Zix, turned to her with wide, terrified eyes. "H, how are you so calm?" he chittered. "We're about to land on the most dangerous planet in the galaxy." Sarah patted his tentacle reassuringly. "Relax, Zix. It can't be any worse than Black Friday shopping at Walmart." Before Zix could ask what a Walmart was and why it involved ritualistic combat, the ship touched down with a bone-rattling thud. The doors hissed open, and a blast of frigid air rushed in, instantly freezing the moisture in the air and creating a brief, beautiful flurry of indoor snow. "Welcome to HFY, Professor Zilblax announced cheerfully, his voice slightly muffled by the 17 layers of protective gear he wore. "Let's begin our tour, shall we?" As the class shuffled out onto the planet's surface, Sarah's first thought was, this isn't so bad. Her second thought was, oh wait, never mind, as she felt the crushing weight of the planet's gravity trying to turn her into a human pancake. The landscape before them was a nightmarish blend of frozen tundra and active volcanoes, with geysers of liquid methane shooting hundreds of feet into the air at random intervals. In the distance, what looked like a herd of six-legged woolly mammoths with razor-sharp tusks and glowing red eyes trudged across the horizon. "Now then," said Professor Zilblax, his voice barely audible over the howling wind and occasional explosion of a nearby methane pocket. "Our first lesson will be on proper breathing techniques in a corrosive atmosphere. Everyone, please remove your helmets." There was a collective gasp of horror from the class, followed by a series of terrified squeaks, chirps, and in one case, a mournful tuba-like sound. Professor Sarah piped up, raising her hand. "Quick question, are you insane, or just trying to kill us? Because I gotta say, if it's the latter, there are easier ways." The professor's eye stalk swiveled towards her, and she could have sworn she saw a glimmer of amusement in those gelatinous orbs. "Ah, MS Thompson, always the comedian. Of course I'm not asking you to actually remove your helmets. This is merely a thought experiment too. Where is your helmet, by the way?" Sarah blinked, suddenly aware that everyone was staring at her. She reached up to touch her head, finding only her usual mop of unruly hair. "Oh," she said, realization dawning. "I thought that was just a fancy hat. Is that why everything smells like burning tires and regret?" There was a moment of stunned silence, broken only by the distant roar of what sounded suspiciously like a T-Rex gargling lava. Then, to everyone's surprise, Professor Zilblax burst into laughter. "Unbelievable," he exclaimed, his tentacles waving wildly. "MS Thompson, you've been breathing HFY's atmosphere for the past 10 minutes without any ill effects. Do you have any idea how impossible that should be?" Sarah shrugged. "I mean, it's not great, but it's still better than LA. Smog." The professor's laughter redoubled, and soon the entire class was staring at Sarah with a mixture of awe and terror. She had a feeling this was going to be a long field trip. As the day wore on, Sarah found herself inadvertently acing every survival challenge the planet threw at them. While her classmates struggled to stay upright in the crushing gravity, she strolled along as if she were taking a leisurely walk in the park, albeit a park where the squirrels were the size of bears and breathed fire. "And here we have a prime example of HFY's famous acid geysers," Professor Zilblax was saying, gesturing towards a bubbling pool of neon green liquid. "One drop of this on unprotected skin, and, well, let's just say you'd be in for a very bad day." Right on cue, the geyser erupted, sending a spray of corrosive liquid arsing through the air. The class scattered in panic, but Sarah, distracted by what looked like a floating jellyfish made of crystal, didn't notice until it was too late. A generous splash of acid landed directly on her exposed face. "Oh shit," she muttered, more annoyed than alarmed. She wiped the liquid off with her sleeve, leaving behind nothing more than a slight tingle and what she suspected might be a rather fetching green tint to her skin. "Hey, Prof, is this stuff supposed to do anything? Or is it just really bad at its job?" Professor Zilblax's eye stalks looked like they were about to pop out of his protective suit. "You." How he sputtered, for once at a loss for words. Sarah shrugged. "I don't know, maybe I'm just having a good skin day. Though I gotta say, this stuff feels great. Very exfoliating, you guys should try it." The look of abject horror on her classmates' faces or equivalent sensory apparatuses told her that no, they most certainly should not try it. As they continued their trek across the nightmarish landscape, Sarah found herself actually enjoying the experience. Sure, the constant explosions, gravity wells, and attempts by the local fauna to turn her into a quick snack were a bit of a nuisance, but it was still better than that summer she spent as a camp counselor in Florida. "And now," announced Professor Zilblax, his voice tinged with both excitement and trepidation, "we come to the final and most challenging part of our field trip. Behold, the chasm of eternal screams." Before them yawned a massive ravine, so deep that the bottom was lost in swirling mists of what Sarah strongly suspected was not just water vapor. Strange, unearthly howls echoed from its depths, sending shivers down even her surprisingly resilient spine. Your task, continued the professor, is to cross this chasm, using only the materials provided. He gestured to a pile of what looked like alien tinker toys and several coils of rope that appeared to be made from some poor creature's intestines. As her classmates set about arguing over the best engineering approach with frequent interruptions to panic or faint, Sarah wandered to the edge of the chasm, peering down into its depths. She mused aloud. Reminds me of that time I went bungee jumping in the Grand Canyon. Except, with more screaming and probable death. She turned back to the group, only to find them all staring at her in horror. What, she asked, suddenly self-conscious. Do I have something on my face? Is it the acid? I knew that stuff was up to no good. MS Thompson, Professor Zilblax said slowly, his voice a mixture of awe and exasperation. You do realize you're floating, don't you? Sarah looked down. Sure enough, her feet were a good 6 inches off the ground. Well, would you look at that, she said with a grin. I guess all that hot yoga finally paid off. Hey, you think this counts as crossing the chasm? Because I'm pretty sure I could just float on over. The professor's gelatinous form seemed to deflate slightly. Yes, MS Thompson, he sighed. I suppose that would indeed count as crossing the chasm. Though I must say, in all my years of teaching, I've never seen anything quite like this. Sarah beamed. Thanks, Prof. I aim to please, and occasionally defy the laws of physics, apparently. As she gracefully floated across the chasm of eternal screams, waving cheerfully to her dumbfounded classmates, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn her exchange program had taken. When she'd signed up for Galactic University, she'd expected challenging classes, cultural misunderstandings, and maybe the occasional homesickness for Earth's inferior but familiar Deathworld. What she hadn't expected was to become the inadvertent star pupil of Extreme Survival 101, all while treating one of the most dangerous planets in the universe like a mildly inconvenient theme park. Landing softly on the other side of the chasm, Sarah turned back to her professor and classmates. So, she called out, her voice echoing across the vast expanse, what's next? Because I gotta say, this has been fun and all, but I'm starting to get a little peckish. You think any of those 6-legged woolly mammoths are edible? Professor Zilblax's eye stalks drooped in what Sarah had come to recognize as a sign of utter defeat. MS Thompson, he said wearily, I believe you've more than proven your point. In fact, I dare say you've single-handedly redefined our understanding of Deathworld species adaptability. Sarah grinned. Oh, thanks, Prof. Does this mean I get extra credit? The professor's gelatinous form shuddered in what might have been a chuckle or a sob. It was hard to tell through all the protective gear. My dear, at this point I'm considering recommending you for an honorary doctorate in extreme survival, possibly also in defying all known laws of physics and biology. As the rest of the class began the arduous process of constructing a bridge across the chasm punctuated by frequent screams of terror and at least one existential crisis, Sarah settled down on a relatively comfortable-looking rock to wait. She pulled out a granola bar from her pocket because even on a Class 1 Deathworld, a girl's got to eat, and munched thoughtfully. You know, she called out to no one in particular, when I applied for this exchange program, the brochure said something about expanding horizons and challenging preconceptions. I just didn't expect it to be quite so literal. One of her classmates, a Zagonian who resembled nothing so much as a sentient fern with eyes, paused in its bridge-building efforts to wave a frond at her. How it rustled plaintively. How are you so? Awesome? Adaptable? Devastatingly charming, Sarah supplied helpfully. Insane, the Zagonian finished, its leaves drooping in defeat. Sarah laughed. Oh, that's just the human spirit, my chlorophyll-filled friend. Where you see certain death, we see a fun weekend activity. Where you see impossible odds, we see a challenge to be overcome. Where you see a nightmarish hellscape of a planet actively trying to murder us every second. We see that too. But we also see an opportunity to prove ourselves. She paused, taking another bite of her granola bar. Plus, I'm pretty sure all those gamma rays are giving me superpowers. So, bonus. As if on cue, a massive tremor shook the planet, nearly sending the half-constructed bridge and its builders tumbling into the abyss. Sarah, still comfortably perched on her rock, merely raised an eyebrow. Prof, she called out. Is planet-wide seismic activity on the syllabus? Or is this more of an extracurricular thing? Professor Zilblax, who had been in the middle of a heated debate, with a glibblebler student over the structural integrity of intestine-based rope, turned all 4 of his eye stalks towards Sarah. This is unprecedented, he stammered. HFYEx hasn't experienced tectonic activity in over 10 million years. Sarah nodded sagely. Ah, I see. So we're witnessing a once in 10 million years event. Neat. Do we get extra credit for that too? Before the professor could respond, likely with a mixture of exasperation and begrudging admiration, the ground beneath them gave a mighty heave. The chasm began to widen, its edges crumbling away like cosmic cookie crumbs. Everyone, back to the ship, Professor Zilblak shouted, his tentacles flailing in panic. Abort mission. Abort. The class didn't need telling twice. They abandoned their half-finished bridge and began scrambling back the way they had come, their various appendages flailing in terror. Sarah, however, remained seated on her rock, which was now ominously close to the chasm's ever-widening maw. Guys, she called out. I don't mean to be a bother, but I'm pretty sure this rock is about to become a permanent resident of the chasm of eternal screams. Any chance of a lift? Her classmates, already halfway back to the relative safety of their landing site, looked back at her with a mixture of horror and indecision. It was Zixix, her glibbler seatmate from earlier, who finally worked up the courage to speak. But how can we help? He chittered nervously. You're on the other side of the chasm, and our bridge is destroyed. Sarah glanced down at the yawning abyss beneath her, then back at her retreating classmates. A slow grin spread across her face. Well, she said, cracking her knuckles, I guess it's time to see if those superpowers have kicked in yet. With that, she stood up on her rapidly disintegrating perch, took a deep breath, and launched herself across the chasm in a leap that would have made Olympic long jumpers weep with envy. Time seemed to slow as Sarah soared through the air, the howling winds of HFYEx whipping through her hair. Below her, the chasm roared its disappointment at missing out on a human-sized snack. Behind her, the rock she'd been sitting on finally gave up the ghost and tumbled into the abyss with a mournful rumble. For a moment it looked like Sarah might actually make it. Then, at the apex of her jump, gravity remembered it was supposed to be 3 times stronger on this god-forsaken planet and yanked her downward with a vengeance. Oh, come on, Sarah yelled as she plummeted towards the misty depths. I was promised superpowers. Just as all seemed lost, a tentacle shot out and wrapped around her wrist. Sarah looked up to see Professor Zilblak's, his gelatinous form straining with effort, anchored to the edge of the cliff by a chain of her alien classmates. Gotcha, the professor grunted, his eye stalks bulging with exertion. Though I must say, MS, Thompson, your penchant for dramatic gestures is going to give me an aneurysm. Assuming my species can even have aneurysms. With a mighty heave and no small amount of panicked squealing from the alien student chain, Sarah was pulled to safety. She landed on solid ground with a thud, breathing heavily but grinning from ear to ear to ear. Thanks, Prof, she panted. I owe you one. Maybe I'll even start wearing that helmet you keep going on about. Professor Zilblak's eye stalks drooped in what Sarah had come to recognize as his why do I even bother expression. MS Thompson, at this point I'm convinced you could survive a supernova armed with nothing but a witty one-liner and sheer audacity. As the group hastily made their way back to the ship, the ground continuing to shake ominously beneath them, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Sure, she might not have aced the class in the traditional sense, but she'd certainly made an impression. Once safely aboard the transport ship and hurtling away from the disintegrating surface of HFYEx, Professor Zilblak addressed the class. Well, he said, his tentacles still slightly quivery from the ordeal, I think we can all agree that this field trip was educational. In ways I never could have anticipated. He cast a meaningful glance at Sarah, who responded with an innocent smile and a thumbs up. I believe, the professor continued, that we've all learned a valuable lesson about the unpredictable nature of Deathworlds and the beings that inhabit them. Ms. Thompson, would you care to share any final thoughts with the class? Sarah, who had been busy wringing acid out of her hair, looked up with surprise. Oh, sure, she said, standing up and addressing her shell-shocked classmates. I guess what I've learned is that extreme is really just a matter of perspective. What's a nightmarish hellscape to one person is just a mildly spicy Tuesday to another. She paused, considering her next words carefully. But more importantly, I think we've all seen the value of teamwork today. Sure, I might be able to breathe corrosive atmosphere and accidentally defy gravity, but I wouldn't be here without all of you guys forming a ridiculous alien chain to fish me out of that chasm. The class stared at her in stunned silence for a moment before breaking into tentative applause, or the various species equivalents thereof. Professor Zilblax's eye stalks curved in what Sarah had come to recognize as a smile. Well said, MS Thompson. Though I must admit I'm not entirely sure how to grade this field trip. On one hand, you demonstrated unprecedented survival skills. On the other hand, you also managed to trigger a planetary cataclysm. Sarah shrugged. Split the difference and give me a B. The professor's gelatinous form shuddered with what might have been laughter. Oh, I think we can do better than that. In light of your unique contributions to the field of extreme survival, I'm recommending you for an honorary doctorate, as discussed earlier. A cheer went up from the class, with even the most traumatized students managing to join in. As the applause died down, Six raised a tentative pseudopod. Professor, he chittered nervously. Does this mean we'll be having more field trips with Sarah? The entire class turned to look at Professor Zilblax, a mixture of terror and excitement on their alien faces. The professor's eye stalk swiveled towards Sarah, who was failing spectacularly at looking innocent. Well, he said slowly, I suppose that depends on whether the Galactic University's insurance policy covers accidental planetary destruction due to human shenanigans. Sarah grinned. Oh, come on, Prof, you know as well as I do that they'll be begging me to come back. After all, who else is going to keep your extreme survival class interesting? As the transport ship zipped through the cosmos, leaving behind a disintegrating HFY and a very confused galactic scientific community, Sarah couldn't help but feel excited about what the rest of her exchange program might bring. After all, if this was just the first field trip, who knew what other adventures awaited? One thing was for certain, the galaxy wasn't ready for humanity's unique brand of survival skills. But ready or not, here they came.